Snow covered everything, turning the colony streets white and silent. The wind howled between metal walls and frozen windows. Mark pulled his coat tighter and walked fast toward the trading post. It was the only place still open this late. He had just one ration card left and planned to use it on canned food to survive the rest of the week. But then he saw something strange near the trading post door. A small crowd had gathered, but no one was helping. Some people just stared. Others walked past like it was nothing. Mark stopped too, confused at first. There was a shape in the snow. A woman curled into herself, shaking. Her skin was pale blue with frost. Her long white hair stuck to her face. She wore nothing but a torn wrap and thin cloth around her feet. In her arms was something wrapped in old cloth. It didn't move. Child Mark stepped closer. The woman didn't even lift her head. He could see her lips moving like she was whispering. Something but no sound came out. Her eyes were half-closed. A man beside him muttered, "Another one of those aliens, begging again. Let her freeze." "Maybe then the others will stop coming here." Mark looked at him, then back at the woman. Shh. Didn't even hear them. She looked like she was about to die right there on the ground inside the trading post. The owner looked out through the glass door but didn't open it. He just shook his head and went back to counting. Supplies Mark opened the door and stepped. Inside, the warmth hit his face like a wave, but he didn't feel better. He looked at the small shelf of clothes near the counter. Boots, gloves, a thick coat, all for one ration card. His last one. He picked the warmest set and walked to the counter. The owner looked surprised. "You buying those for yourself, Mark?" Didn't answer. He gave the ration card and took the clothes. He stepped outside again. Snow blew into his face, but he ignored it. The woman was still in the same spot. She hadn't moved. Her arms still held the child tight against her chest. Mark knelt down slowly. People around him watched, but said nothing. He unwrapped the coat and placed it gently over her back. He slid the gloves over her fingers. They were ice cold. He helped lift her feet one by one and pulled the boots on. The woman blinked once but still didn't speak. Finally, he placed the thick blanket scarf over the child in her arms. Then he leaned closer and said, "Just one thing. Come home with me." The woman didn't respond right away. For a moment, Mark thought she hadn't understood him. But then her lips moved again. Her voice was dry like sand. Why? Mark looked around. The people were walking away now. The wind was still strong. No one would help. No one ever did. Because, "I don't want you or your child to die here," he said. She stared at him for a long second. Her eyes were tired, scared, and full of sorrow. But then, slowly, she nodded. Mark stood up and offered his hand. She tried to get up, but her legs shook too much. He leaned down and helped her. She held the child close and leaned against him together. They walked back across the icy street. The wind pushed against them, but Mark held her steady. She didn't say another word. Her child didn't move. But Mark could feel a little warmth returning to her body as the coat wrapped tighter around her. When they reached his old cabin, he opened the door and led her inside. It was cold inside too, but still better than outside. He started the heater and lit the stove. She sat on the floor beside the fire and placed the child gently in front of her. Mark handed her a warm cup of soup. She touched it like she had never felt heat before. The child coughed. Mark knelt beside them and saw her eyes open slightly. The child was still alive, but weak. He looked at the woman. "Your name?" She looked at him, confused. Then she pointed at herself. "Leary." She whispered. He nodded. "I'm Mark." She pointed at the child. "Sierra." Mark smiled. "You're safe now, Leary." "You and Sierra." She didn't understand every word, but she felt the kindness in his voice. Her lips shook as she held the cup. Then a single tear rolled down her cheek and landed on the floor. That night, as the wind screamed outside, Mark sat across the room and watched over them. Leary fed Sierra tiny spoonfuls of soup. Her hands still trembled, but her face looked different. Now not safe yet, but no longer alone. That was enough for now. The fire crackled gently as warmth spread through the small cabin. Mark sat across the room on an old crate, his eyes watching the alien woman and her child without blinking. He didn't know what made him bring them home. Maybe it was the look in her eyes, or maybe it was because no one else did anything when They were freezing outside. Maybe he just couldn't walk away. Leary held her child close. Little girl, Sierra, lay wrapped in Mark's spare blanket, coughing softly but breathing. Leary's fingers moved through the child's thin hair, slow and careful, like she was scared the girl might disappear. Mark stood and poured a bowl of warm soup. He brought it over and placed it beside Leary. She looked at it, then at him, as if trying to read his intentions. "It's okay," Mark said, keeping his voice low. "Eat. You need it more than me." Leary slowly picked up the bowl and sniffed. The soup then, with both hands, she sipped. Her face changed. It's not because of the taste, but because of the warmth. She took another sip, faster this time, then held it out to Sura. The child turned her head weakly, eyes half closed. She sipped from her mother's hand, and her cough slowed a little. It wasn't much, but it was something. Mark moved back to the S. Creighton sat down again outside. The storm was still roaring. Wind pushed against the walls, ice cracked against the windows, but inside there was fire and breath, and quiet. Leary looked around the room. Her eyes paused on everything. The tools on the shelf, the cracked mug on the table, the old jacket hanging by the door. She was memorizing it all. Mark noticed. "You've never seen a human home before?" She shook her head. "How long were you out there?" Leary lowered her eyes. "Since they burned my place," she whispered. Mark leaned forward. "Burned men, patrols, looking for ones like me. Said my ID was fake. They took others. I ran with Sierra, hid in snow." Her words were broken but clear enough. Mark clenched his jaw. He had heard stories like this. Colony guards had stopped protecting. Now they only hunted. Aliens were no longer seen as citizens. They were seen as problems to clear out. "You should rest," he said. "You and Sierra, this place is safe. No one will come here tonight." Leary looked at him, unsure. But then she lay down beside her daughter, wrapping her tightly in the blanket. Mark tossed another piece of wood into the fire and leaned back against the wall. He pulled his coat over himself and closed his eyes. But sleep didn't come. The sound woke him. Wasn't loud. It's just a whisper, like wind passing through teeth. But it was sharp. He opened his eyes and sat up. Lori was shaking. Her arms were wrapped around her chest. Her mouth was open. No words, but her face was twisted in terror. She wasn't awake. She was dreaming. Mark rushed over and knelt beside her. "Leary," he whispered. "It's okay. You're here. You're safe." She didn't wake. Her lips moved fast in her language. Her hands reached out like she was trying to hold something that wasn't there. "Sierra." She gasped. Mark gently placed his hand on her shoulder. She froze. Her eyes snapped open for a moment. She didn't recognize him. Then her body relaxed, and she pulled away, holding Sarah close again. "It's all right," he said. "Just a dream." Leary didn't answer. But her eyes filled with tears, and she buried her face in Sierra's back. She made no sound, just held her tighter. Mark stood slowly and walked to the kitchen corner. He filled a cup with warm water and brought it back. Leary took it, hands shaking. She sipped slowly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You don't need to be." "Not here." She looked at him with wet eyes. "You give fire, you give soup, you give home." Why, Mark didn't know what to say. "No one help us," she added. "No one look, but you did." Why, he looked at her, at the little girl breathing softly beside her. "I think everyone deserves a chance to live." He sat Leary, nodded once, slowly. Then she looked at the fire again and whispered a word in her language. Mark asked, "What does that mean?" She thought for a moment, then said, "Safe." He smiled. Then she asked, "You have family?" Mark shook his head. "Not anymore. Just me now." She looked at him longer than before. Her expression changed. Not quite trust. Not yet. But something close. "Thank you," she said. He stood up. "Sleep now. I'll watch the fire." Leary laid back down with her daughter and pulled the blanket tighter. This time her eyes closed more softly, and this time she didn't cry in her sleep. It began with the sound of boots crunching. Snowmark was outside chopping wood beside his cabin. The sun had finally returned after 2 days of storm. Trees still dripped with ice, and the wind carried a bite. He wiped sweat from his forehead and glanced toward the colony road. That's when he saw the figure's dark armor, green lights glowing on their shoulders. Walking in formation across the hilltop colony, snow patrol. Mark's chest tightened inside the house. Leary was feeding Sarah warm broth. The little girl had color in her cheeks now. She giggled softly when her mother touched her nose. For the first time, her smiles looked real. Mark stepped inside quickly and closed the door behind him. "They're here," he said. Voice low. Leary looked up, her eyes full of fear. "She understood at once. Go under," Mark said, pulling up a small square of the wooden floor. Beneath it was a storage hatch for tools and winter supplies, now cleaned out and padded with blankets. Leary clutched Sarah and crawled down into the space. Mark covered them with a quilt and closed the hatch just as a loud knock shook the front door. Boom, boom, boom. Mark took a breath and opened it. 2 officers stood outside. Their visors hid their faces. One held a scanner, the other a long staff that pulsed with blue energy. "You Mark Dalton?" "Yes," he replied. "We're looking for illegal refugees. There was a report you brought someone in during the storm. An alien woman with a child." Mark forced his face to stay calm. "No one here but me," he said. "I live alone." "Ask the post trader. He'll tell you I only bought supplies for myself." The first officer lifted the scanner and pointed it at the door. It buzzed and clicked. The second officer stepped forward. "We'll look around anyway." Protocol. Mark opened the door wider. "Be my guest." They walked inside. The scanner swept across the room, beeping once near the floor. "What's under there?" One asked. "Old food crates and broken chairs," Mark answered. "Nothing you want." The officer knelt and tapped the wood, but didn't lift it. After a moment he stood. The other checked the back room, the heater, and the closet. Nothing. They stood by the door again, not satisfied. "Odd that you have 2 bowls by the fire." One said. "I eat twice," Mark replied. "Once hot, once cold." "That's my system." The officer stared at him a moment longer, then stepped out. "Into the cold again. If we find out you're lying, you'll lose your rights, and you'll be marked." Mark nodded. "I'm aware." They walked off, leaving a trail of boot marks in the snow. Mark shut the door and locked it. His hands were shaking. He rushed to the hatch and opened it fast. Leary stared up at him, eyes wide with panic. Sarah was sleeping, unaware. "It's okay," Mark whispered. "They're gone." Leary climbed out, still trembling. She didn't say a word. Mark sat down beside her. "They'll come back," she said at last. "I know," he replied. "We'll need a plan." She clutched her arms around her knees. "They took my sister like this," she screamed. "They took her child too. Never saw them again." Mark didn't speak for a moment. Then he looked at her. "I won't let that happen to you. Not while I'm still breathing." Leary turned to him. Her face had changed. She didn't look broken anymore. She looked fierce. "You helped me," she said. "Now I help you." Mark tilted his head. How she pointed to the window. "Past those hills, there's an old shelter. Refugees live there, hidden. My brother helped build it before he died. They take people in. Even humans." Mark raised an eyebrow. "They'd take me. You saved us." "They will." He leaned forward. "Can we make it if we leave tomorrow?" "And move fast." He looked at the little girl, still curled up in blankets near the fire. "We'll carry her if we have to." Sadly, he smiled faintly that night. They packed what they could. Mark rolled up his maps and placed 2 water flasks in his coat. Leary folded the blanket Sarah loved and tied it with rope just before dawn. Mark stepped outside to check the sky. No snow tonight. Stars were clear. He looked back at the cabin one last time. It was the only home he had known in years, but what waited ahead might be better than what he was leaving behind inside. Leary picked up Sarah and nodded once. She didn't ask if he was sure. She already knew. Together they stepped into the cold. Not running, but choosing in this time. They were not alone. The old transport sled hadn't moved in years. Its wheels were buried in ice, and its power cell hadn't worked since the last blackout. But Mark was under it now, sleeves rolled up, oil on his face, hammering frozen bolts loose like his life depended on it. Because it did inside the cabin, Leary rocked Sarah gently, humming something from her homeworld. The girl was smiling in her sleep, her head resting in Leary's lap. She hadn't smiled like that in days. Leary knew why. The child could feel it too. Something had changed in the air. They were leaving Mark. Came back inside, stomping snow off his boots. His hands were red from the cold and cut from the tools. But his face showed something different. Determination. I got the sled to wake up, he said. Not fully, but it'll run. Think we can load it with supplies, maybe fit under the tarp? Enough to make it across the ice plains. Leary stood, brushing hair from her eyes. We go tonight. Mark shook his head. Not yet. There's one more thing I need. Fuel cells. Without them, the sled will die halfway and we'll freeze out there. She looked worried. Where do you get them? He paused before answering. The junkyard at Sector 9. There's a man there, Braun. He trades with everyone, no questions. But he doesn't deal for free. Leary looked at the floor. We have nothing, Mark nodded, except my toolkit. It's worth more than one. Fuel cell. I'll give him that. Leary reached out, touching his hand for the first time. You built your life with those. He smiled faintly. Now I'll use them to save someone else's. She didn't stop him. Mark left before sunrise, pulling the sled behind him like a cart. He passed through the lower alleys of the colony, head down, ignoring the stairs. People noticed he wasn't alone anymore. Whispers had started. But no one spoke to his face when he reached Sector 9, the junkyard. Looked like a pile of dead ships and broken dreams. Scrap towers leaned against the sky. Sparks flew from somewhere deep inside Braun. Mark called out. A loud metal clang answered, followed by a voice like crushed gravel. You still breathing? Mark. Braun stepped out from behind a wrecked freighter. He was tall, wide, and covered in soot. His robotic arm clicked with every move. Mark lifted the heavy toolkit. Trade. Braun raised an eyebrow. That's your good set. I need fuel cells. 2 of them. Braun scratched his beard. You hiding someone? That alien widow everyone's talking about. Mark stayed quiet. Braun smiled without warmth. Thought so. Word spreads fast. They're watching you now. Show your face again with those 2. They'll burn you out of your house. Not coming back, Mark said. Just give me the fuel cells. Braun studied him for a moment. Then he reached behind a crate and tossed 2 small glowing cylinders onto the sled. Take them. But one more thing, he said. They catch you out there. I never saw you. Mark nodded. You never have. He walked back through the side trails, avoiding the roads. When he reached the edge of the hills, he turned once to look at the colony, the place where he had once believed he could live in peace. It looked smaller. Now Leary was outside waiting, covered in layers of fabric. She ran up when she saw the fuel cells. You did it. We leave in 1 hour, he said. Pack light. We'll travel fast. She turned and rushed inside. Together they loaded the sled. Blankets, water, dried food. 1 sharp blade. Leary tied Sierra onto her back with strong fabric and wrapped the child tight. The girl snuggled close without a sound. Mark pulled the tarp over the supplies and tested the sled. It hummed low, a quiet growl like a machine waking. From sleep they were ready as the last sunlight dipped behind the ice cliffs. They stepped onto the path that led away from everything, looked back once. Then she asked softly, Are you afraid? Mark thought for a second only of turning back. She didn't ask anything more. They walked in silence until the stars came out. Sierra slept against her mother's back. Mark kept his hand near the controls, guiding the sled through frozen paths and over quiet hills. Somewhere out there was a hidden place, a valley where people were still kind, where aliens weren't hunted like animals. It didn't know if it truly existed, but if it didn't, he would make one. He glanced at Leary. Her eyes were fixed ahead. Glowing faintly in the night, he had nothing left but what was with him now, and maybe that was enough. The sky was supposed to be clear. That's what the old weather tower said as they left the edge of the colony hills. No snow. No wind. Safe to cross the plains, but halfway across the frozen fields, the wind changed. Mark looked up. Dark clouds were spinning fast above them. The sled began to rattle under his hands. Leary tightened the straps around Sarah, who was already asleep on her back. Then a sound filled the air like a warning howl. The storm was coming. We need to find shelter. Mark said quickly. Larry's hair whipped across her face. There's nothing but ice. Mark scanned the horizon. Ahead was a deep dip in the land, like a long scar across the field. It might be a trench or an old mining path. He pointed toward it. Down there. Go, they ran. The sled bumped and slid. Behind them, Mark leaned forward to steer. Leary gripped the sides. Snow blew into their eyes, blinding them. The wind screamed in their ears. By the time they reached the trench, the storm had swallowed the sky. Mark pulled the sled under a frozen overhang. It wasn't a cave, but it blocked the wind. They dropped to the ground, breathing hard. Sierra whimpered. In her sleep, Mark unpacked a heat coil and snapped it into the ground. A soft red glow began to spread around them. Larry pulled Sarah close and wrapped the thickest blanket around her. She touched the child's cheeks. It was cold, but not turning blue. Still alive, Mark sat beside them, pulling his coat tighter. "We can't keep going tonight," he said. "The storm will tear the sled apart." Leary nodded slowly. "We wait here." They sat together in the glow of the heat coil. Snow blew past the entrance like white fire. The walls groaned with wind pressure. The temperature dropped more and more, but inside their little corner, the warmth stayed. Mark's hands were shaking. Ari noticed and reached out. She placed her hands over his and pressed gently. "You saved us again," she whispered. He looked at her. "I should have checked the sky better." "This is my fault." "No," she said. "You didn't leave us." "That is what matters." Sierra turned and opened her eyes. She looked up at Mark and blinked. Her hand reached toward, and Mark leaned in and touched her fingers. They were so small, so fragile. "Get warm, you're strong," he whispered to her. Sierra smiled suddenly. A loud roar came from above. The walls shook. Snow tumbled down from the top of the trench. Mark grabbed Leary and Sierra, pulling them back. The cave mouth half-collapsed said. Path behind them was blocked. Leary gasped. "What now?" Mark checked the other end of the trench. A narrow path twisted down between two frozen rock walls. "There's another way out," he said. "We'll wait till the storm slows, then we move that way." Leary nodded. But her hands didn't stop shaking. Mark leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes for just a moment. The cold pressed against his skin. The noise of the wind became distant. Then he heard Ida's voice, not Leary's, not Sarissat. Was inside his head. "You should have left them. You're going to die." He opened his eyes fast. Nothing was there. Just the storm. Leary was watching him. "You're all right?" she asked. "Just tired." He replied. She nodded and looked down at her daughter. Then she said something that made Mark freeze. "In my world, you would be a guardian, one who protects the broken, one who never turns away." Mark didn't answer. He looked at the little girl and the way she held his finger while sleeping. Thought of all the things he left behind. In the colony, warm meals, a roof. Tuzande. Then he thought of this moment. It was worth more than all of that. The storm outside finally began to fade. The wind softened. The snow slowed. Mark stood and stretched his arms. He turned to Leary. "We move in 10 minutes. That path leads to the edge of the next ridge. If the valley's real, we'll be there by sunrise." Leary picked up Sierra and stood slowly. Her legs shook, but she didn't fall. Mark reloaded the sled. The tarp was torn but still usable. He pushed it to the path and held out his hand to Leary. Took it. They stepped out of the trench into fresh snow. Faces stinging from the cold. They didn't speak. They just walked one step at a time together. The sun rose like a secret behind the mountains. Its light touched the snow with gold, warming nothing but showing everything. Mark and Leary stood at the edge of a cliff, breathing hard, their clothes torn, faces red with cold. Behind them was a broken trail of sled tracks and footprints fading into the ice. In front of them was something they never expected. Valley not empty, alive. Dozens of small shelters were scattered across the flat land below. Smoke curled into the air. People moved like shadows, some with alien features like Leary's, others with human faces like Mark's. A few children ran between the huts, wrapped in strange, bright colors. And in the center, a fire so large it glowed like a beacon. Leary stepped forward. First, Mark held her arm, eyes still locked on the sight. "It's real," he said softly. She nodded. "This is the place my brother spoke of. Call it the Cradle." He looked at her. "Are you sure they'll accept us?" Leary turned. "They will. Because they believe in what you already live." He didn't understand. But he followed her down the slow paths. They entered the valley. People turned to look. Some whispered, some stepped back. A tall alien man walked up to them with strong shoulders and deep green skin. He had a long scar across his face and eyes that studied without blinking. Leary bowed her head. I am Leary of the Broken Plains. This is Sira, my child. We have traveled far with him, she said. Pointing to Mark, the man stared at Mark. You are human, yes, Mark replied. I helped them. That's all. The man nodded once. And that is enough, he called out. Something in a strange language. Two women came forward and took Sira from Leary's back, wrapping her in clean fabric. One of them smiled and touched Leary's cheek. You're safe now, she said. In human tongue, Mark watched as they were led toward a long hut made of old ship metal and animal skins. A fire burned in the center. Warmth at last inside, Mark sat on a thick mat while Leary was given soup and clean water. Sira was already asleep, full belly, cheeks pink with life. A woman brought bandages and cleaned the cuts on Mark's hands. She asked no questions, only smiled later. Mark stepped outside. The sun was fully up now. He saw men lifting logs, children laughing, women stitching clothes. Some were alien, some were human. All were working as a short, older man approached. He wore an old human military coat, patched and faded. Your Mark, right? The man said. Mark nodded. I was a captain once. Earth's army. We built this place after the Second Rebellion. Some of us didn't believe in the purge orders, so we left you. Protect aliens here, the captain smiled. We protect anyone who needs it. He brought 2 souls through a storm and gave them warmth. That's worth more than a flag. Mark looked down. Just didn't want them to die. And because of that, they'll live. Stay here if you want. Help us build. Teach the young ones. There's plenty to do. Mark thought about it. The colony was behind him. Nothing waited there. No friends, no future. But here was something new. He nodded once. I'll stay that evening. Fires were lit around the valley. Music played. Soft drums, humming voices. Mark sat by the main fire as Sira climbed into his lap and wrapped her arms around his chest. He held her close. Unsure what to say, Leary sat beside him, wearing new clothes stitched in bright thread. Her face was calm now, her eyes full of light. She leaned in close. She calls you Papa now, she said. Mark looked down at Sira. She was already asleep again. I'm not sure I deserve that, he whispered. Leary smiled. Gave me hope. That is what a father does. Mark looked into the fire. He thought about all the nights alone in the cabin, all the cold mornings, all the times he thought kindness was weakness. And then he looked at Leary. You're not alone anymore, she said. He nodded slowly. No longer just a wanderer, no longer just a man surviving, now part of something living, something warm. Snow fell gently across the valley, now not harsh like before. It moved like dust from the sky, soft and slow, resting on rooftops and shoulders without threat. Mark stood near the gate, holding a hammer in one hand and a board in the other. He had spent the morning helping repair the fences along the east wall, not because someone told him to. He wanted to. Leary walked up behind him, holding a cup of hot root tea. She placed it into his hands and smiled. Your hands need rest. Mark took the cup and nodded. The fence needed fixing. This place has done too much for us already. Leary looked around. Children were playing near the central fire. A few adults gathered around a pot, cooking stew. Everyone moved with quiet purpose. No weapons, no fear. Just life. You've done much for them too, she said. They speak of you now. The human. Who brought the stormed ones home? Mark raised an eyebrow. Is that what they call us? She laughed gently. It is a name of honor. Few make it across the frozen plains. Fewer still carry others with them. He sipped the tea. I didn't carry you. You walked the whole way. You carried us in other ways, she said. Her voice had warmth in it. The kind that lived inside people, not beside fires that night. The valley gathered for the winter promise, a quiet ceremony for those who made it through the hardest months. Mark had never seen so many faces together, human and alien, young and old, all standing in a circle as music drifted into the cold air. The fire was lit in the center. One elder stepped forward and called out names. Survivors, new arrivals, children. born, those lost. Then the elder pointed to Mark. This man, she said, came with nothing but a broken sled and 2 frozen souls. He gave his last meal to strangers, gave his coat to a child, and he gave his home to hope. We name him Keeper of the Warmth. Mark stood there, unsure of what to do. But Sierra ran forward and grabbed his hand. She pulled him toward the center. Smiling wide, the crowd clapped softly. No loud cheers. Just quiet honor. Leary stepped beside. Hyman placed her hand in his. After the fire ceremony, Mark sat near the edge of the valley with Sierra sleeping on his lap. Leary sat close, shoulder touching as she looked up at the stars. I used to think they were watching me. All those lights. All that distance. I thought I was small, useless. You were never small, Mark, said. I was silent. I was afraid. I lived in shadows. Then you found me. You gave me light. Mark didn't answer. He just held her hand. She turned and placed her head on his shoulder. I want to stay here, she whispered. I want you with me. I want Sarah to grow with laughter, not fear. Mark nodded slowly. This is our home now, he said. All 3 of us. Weeks passed. Mark was no longer just the stranger who arrived with the storm. He was the man who fixed roofs, carved wooden toys for children, taught others how to repair broken heaters. People came to him with questions, with jokes, with friendship. He joined the teaching circle, helping young aliens learn human words. Her voice grew stronger each day. She wore colors now, reds, greens. Even gold. Sierra ran through the valley with other children, laughing with both tongues. She called Mark Papa like she had always known him. In one night, under the stars, Leary reached into her coat and pulled out a ring. It was simple, a circle made of braided silver and wire. It was my brother's, she said. He gave it to me for protection. I want to give it to you. Mark looked at it, then at her. I never asked for anything, he said. And you gave us everything, she replied. She slid the ring onto his finger. No vows, no ceremony, just the quiet promise between 2 souls who found each other in the cold that night. The 3 of them lay together in their small cabin, wrapped in one blanket. Outside, snow kept falling. But inside, there was warmth, not from fire, from family, the kind you choose, the kind that saves you.